So this evening, I'm going to begin a conversation about hoodoo, voodoo, Santeria, and many others, but those are the three main, probably the most well-known traditions that honor the old gods of Africa. So before we speak about this religion, I really want to do a little bit of a history lesson regarding what does it mean to be influenced by the African diaspora. So I tried to find some really common places that anybody could find online. Of course, I've been doing this for a really long time. Gosh, I started in 1994 with my godmother, Lady Demeter, who owned a botanica store called Under the Stars here in Broward County. And I went in there for a candle because I was going through a really, really rough personal time. And before that, I had not really been anything but, right before that, I was very spiritual, but I come from a very Christian and Jewish background. And so I went to Christian high schools, and so very kind of spiritual background. But when you get into your 20s, when you leave home, especially during that period, which was the mid 80s, early 90s, a lot of folks were just leaving traditional churches because they weren't offering anything that was useful for those folks. So anyway, I stumbled upon Lady Demeter's store and became kind of fascinated. And then I just sort of started hanging out there. And she let me and was grateful. So I got to sit and watch what she did. And so, like most folks who learn this, I learned it from a teacher who just kind of let me watch what she did and let me ask lots of questions. So I also want to clarify that I personally am not an initiate of any particular one of these and African diasporic spiritual traditions or religions. I'm a Unitarian pagan. I really practice the fairy tradition, which for me is very easily melded in with the traditions of Santeria and Voodoo and Hoodoo. And I've been doing this for, like I said, like a very, very long time. How long is that? Like 25 years I've been doing it? 26, something like that. It's been a great trip and a lot of learning. But I am not an initiate. I'm not trained by anybody but Lady Demeter, and she was pagan, though she owned a botanica store, and she was very well respected in Broward County by Santeros as well as Voodons and all the other folks that were practicing at the time when it was a less popular thing to do. She was doing this from the 1970s. But anyway, so what exactly is the African diaspora? It's really a term that's used to describe enslaved Africans that were brought to the Americas. I mean, North America, South America, Central America, the Caribbean, for the purpose of making white Europeans wealthy by working as slaves on their plantations of all different kinds of things, cotton, sugar, tobacco, you name the crop, I'm sure they were doing it. And this little map here kind of gives an idea of where some of these folks came. Most African enslaved Africans were brought across the continent to the coast, and also, of course, coastal people. So you can see there's many different locations there along the west coast of Africa. Um, and it's very interesting to see the journeys and where they went and how many. Like this one's very interesting. If you do a little research about like who and what, like Africa is a gigantic continent. It's bigger than South America, it's bigger than North America. Um, so there's lots and lots and lots of different peoples there. Um, and many people don't think, when you think of Egypt, you don't think of Africa, but it's North Africa. Morocco, all those kinds of places are also Africa. And so Africa has a huge number of different cultures, languages, religions, spiritual traditions. And so that is reflected in the different traditions that you find in the Americas, because you can see that a lot of times particular regions of Africa, enslaved Africans, were taken to very specific locations on the other side, on the west side. So in like you're finding more sort of northern African tribes are going more to the North America, and somewhat to the Caribbean, but that central portion is more the Caribbean. And then the further south on the African continent you go, the more those tribes are being sent more to like Brazil. And there were some routes that went from East Africa all the way around the, the Cape, and joined up, and most of those folks would go to probably Brazil. But there are also some locations also on the west side of South America that some enslaved Africans were also taken to. So you can see here I've got like there's so very many different um, religious and spiritual traditions that were born from Africa. And you can see here not just Santeria, but Lukumi, which is also another name for a particular sect of Santeria. Voodoo. Now, Voodoo is different in Haiti than it is in like the Creole form of Voodoo from New Orleans. They all share many things in common, but there are also some differences between these different traditions. Hoodoo is more a Southern North American tradition, like so here in Florida, through the Carolinas, Georgia, Alabama, up through those areas. Like when you think of hoodoo, you kind of think of maybe mountain people, you think of people who live in the woods, mostly you think of white people also. So hoodoo, which you will see later, is a little bit has a slightly different flavor to it. Candomblé is the tradition that is practiced in Brazil. Umbanda is also a tradition that's practiced along the east coast of South America. I can't remember exactly which country, it is. But there's Mukumbe. Winti is from Suriname. So very different traditions, though you'll see that there are some definite significant similarities as well as differences. Okay, here we go. Sorry. Come on. Why won't you change? Doesn't want to do it. There we go. Okay. So I already talked a little bit about the actual sort of just history of how these African religions came here, and even just some of the different traditions within that are pretty well known and some less well known. But how did these things kind of influence us as pagans? So the traditions that were brought here, like they couldn't just practice their faith as it was. Like obviously they were enslaved and they had to do what their masters told them to do. Most of those people were Catholic, and clearly practicing traditions outside of that Catholicism could be very looked down on and actually could cause you to be killed if you were not careful. So they hid their religion, their African traditions in Catholicism. And also because, of course, those traditions are very from Africa are very embedded in the actual place, the soil, the plants, the trees, the animals. All of those things are very important to those traditions. And so clearly the way to make that work here or wherever it would be to incorporate the traditions of indigenous peoples who knew the herbs and the plants and the animals of these places, and they had their own meanings for all those things. So they were easily melded together with Catholicism. And you'll see very shortly the different Orishas are associated with many different Catholic saints. So it's very interesting. And so the Orishas, who are that most of these traditions honor, or the gods and things that they honor, they have all different kinds of things that are associated with them: colors, numbers, particular symbols and icons. So you can see how similar they are to our pagan way, like some of our pagan ways. Certainly as a fairy, it's very, very easy to use the tools that I've learned studying Santeria, specifically for me, because that's kind of what I was introduced to, and that's what my godmother was doing. Even though I do not believe that she was an initiate either, but she did own a botanica store. It was very interesting. She was very well respected in our community before she passed away in 2001, I believe. Anyway, the learning, like learning how, like when I'm reading, when I'm talking to Santeros, because I've also spoken, especially since I do a Yamaya ritual at the end of the year, every year for the new year. When I initially put that together, I consulted with quite a few different high priests and high priestesses of Santeria, and also ones that sent people who were initiates in those traditions, but were also pagan, because there's quite a few in our community who are both. Just to make sure that I was dotting all my I's and crossing all my T's and making sure I wasn't stepping on any toes or pissing off any Orishas or anything like that. Because I'm not an initiate. And I don't think that it's wrong to utilize the tools that you can learn from these traditions. And I don't believe that is, if you're doing it in a respectful way and you're learning it for real. I mean, I've been studying this for more than a quarter century. I spent a lot of time reading, keeping myself up to date on what's going on, thought wise in that community. So I think that you can successfully do that, but always, always follow how, if you're going to try to do something along these lines, you need to follow what they would do in their rituals, like how maybe the ways in which they would go through different sections, like how do you start your rituals, a little bit different for Santeria than it is for pagans. It's super pagan, but it's it's not like necessarily very Wiccan, I guess, is particularly, because like most of the rituals that those of us who've been a member of CUUPs for a really long time are very heavily influenced by Wiccan rituals, even if we are not Wiccan. But most of us can go along with it because it provides a good, solid framework for doing good magic. So same kind of thing with Santeria or other hoodoo or voodoo or these other things. Do not be disrespectful. Make sure you do your homework and that you research what you're doing, and do not feel don't feel scared, but be respectful going into one of the many botanica stores that are in our community. Many of them, if you're genuine, will answer questions for you or help you. Anyway, so I think that the influences of Santeria or these Yoruban traditions, you can see them like when you're pagan, you're practicing. Paganism is a religion of place. Like you are practicing it from the position of, say, where your ancestors came from, or where you came from, or where you are now. Like, and when you do that kind of thing, then you're looking at those places and seeing what kind of animals and plants are there. Is it cold? Is it hot? What gods and goddesses were traditionally or originally, if that's even possible to locate, to figure out, who are they? At the least, you should honor them. You'll also see a lot of crossover in terms of gods and goddesses, orishas, spirits, all these things. Their nature is very much archetypal. So you'll find a mother goddess or orisha, you'll find a father god or orisha, you'll find a warrior, you'll find a healer, you'll find the lawyer, you'll find all of these different things are universal in nature. So I think if you can view it from with that kind of a lens, that this is something that is cross-cultural, everybody does these things, especially in the pagan traditions. It's just a matter of analyzing what's going on and trying to figure out, how do you do that? We do cleansing too. They do it just in kind of a different way. We use sage, right? I have my sage. I'm not going to put it on because I got my room door closed and it'll smoke up the whole room. And then I won't be able to breathe. But that's something we do too, right? So anyway, let's move on to the next slide. So let's go into the nitty gritty of talking about this. I don't see any reason to whatever pitter patter around here. So I'm going to start off with the tradition that to me is probably the most different of the African influenced spiritual traditions, and that's hoodoo. You could also think of it as root workers or conjurers. And depending on where you are, this is going to perhaps be a little bit different. So if you're a hoodoo person working in, say, Louisiana or Mississippi, your hoodoo might be closer to voodoo. But if you're working in, say, Georgia or North Carolina or Tennessee or Kentucky, you're going to be a little bit closer to a traditional, what would be considered a hoodoo root worker or conjurer. So I'm just going to read this definition because I thought it was a really good overall, like it caught all of the major things here. So all of these are folk religions, right? So all these African influenced religions are folk religions. So that folk religions synthesize popular beliefs and practices, frequently animistic in nature, that are developed within cultures to handle everyday problems. In many contexts, they coexist within high religious traditions and sometimes even with secular humanism. So much like most of magic, it's a tool. So it doesn't necessarily have to, which is a little bit hard sometimes to think about because we are working with orishas and things like that. But you can do this very neatly beside another tradition. I do. Of course, most Santeros do too, because they have a Catholic side to their perspective, right? So, and then of course you can even have people who don't really believe in specifically God, like an actual being, but think of it as more of like an archetype. Like people who are maybe more Jungian in nature might look at it as a more like from a more archetypal perspective. Um, anyway, so um, in tribal contexts where people understand themselves to live in terms of an extended family or a clan or a tribe, which have very distinctive cultural heritages. So basically, back in the day, right, prior to so like globalization really of the world, which really kind of happened at the same time as slavery was happening. That was the very beginnings of that. But so folk religions frequently exist outside of the fold of a major world religious tradition. So really that could be anybody for sure, but it certainly does incorporate all the common things about hoodoo, voodoo, Santeria, all those kinds of things. But it also kind of puts a very sharp focus on hoodoo is really very informal. So if you are learning from, uh, a root worker or a conjurer, it's going to be super informal. Like my education with Lady Demeter was probably could be more closely aligned with hoodoo, root work, conjure, because I basically informally I would sit with her, and while she was advising clients, because she had a big table in the middle of her store, and she'd point at things and make me go get them, and she would like dress candles for people, and I would be observing, like, what are you putting on there, what kind of oils, what kind of what are you doing there, and I'm listening to what she's talking to them about and how she's advising them and making notes. So that's a little bit more of an informal kind of tradition that is like a hoodoo root worker kind of training, if you will. But all of the emphasis and the importance, if not, I think is more blown bigger in hoodoo, things like nature itself, plants, different plants, what they do, what their purpose is, bones, hair, animals. And I don't mean this, I mean, there are certainly would be animal totems, but you wouldn't maybe call them totems, but you would work with those animals, rocks, of course, dirt, water, all those things, like all those very natural elements are more pronounced, I think, in hoodoo. I think there's a little bit less fluff for hoodoo. The nice thing about the other African traditions is that they're a little bit more showy, right? There's a little bit more flash. So those are the sort of differences that you see. And I feel like hoodoo, like I said, is like more directly connecting with nature as opposed to with some of the other African traditions. Like other kinds of religions, they've kind of put things in between you and talking or going straight to the source. But that's not surprising. I mean, most religions globally, no matter what they are, have all kind of created little hierarchies within themselves in terms of power and who's the high one and who's the low one. I think, to me, hoodoo is a little bit more like it's practiced more solitarily than the others, because the other traditions, you may not have a giant church, but you'd have a group of 12 people or 10 people or 6 people that work together to do rituals. And there's not as much flashy public ritual for hoodoo and root workers. Their rituals are a little bit more just kind of, what do you need? Let's not make a big fluff and fuss. We don't need to give offerings to this Orisha and wear this color and do this thing and like be very specific about how you honor it. It's more be nice, leave an offering for the fairies in the woods sort of thing. So Voodoo, on the other hand, is very, very structured. I would say probably the most structured of all of them, even more so than Santeria. There's very specific different kinds of things that you would not do. I would say that like Voodoo to me would be the sort of the Gardnerians of the African tradition, if you know what I mean, in terms of just a lot of structure and a lot of rules and a lot of doing things in a very particular fashion. Not as a bad thing. A lot of people like structure. I'm not good at it because I'm a fairy and I don't like people tell me what to do, but but it's also, you know, when you learn, especially when you start out, it's good to have that structure because it helps you put everything in some kind of an order that you can utilize in the future if you need to, like on the fly or, you know, which pagans, you know, it's all nice and well to have all the pretty, you know, cool tools and all the stuff, but if you can't whip up a spell in the moment with your finger and a little spit and dirt, you need to do a little bit more practicing because that's the most important thing about it. All the rest of it is the trappings to put your mind in the right place to make your magic more focused. So these are all tools to help you focus yourself on getting what you want done. So I'll tell you a little bit about Voodoo though. It is a traditional Afro-Haitian religion, and it represents the syncretism of the West African Voodoo religion with Roman Catholicism. And its descendants are from Dahomey. I'm sorry, I'm not pronouncing that very well. Dahomean, Congo, Yoruba, and some other ethnic groups. And they all went to what was originally called Saint Domingue, which is the island which has Haiti and the Dominican Republic on it. So half the island is one and half the island is the other. And of course, it was partly Christianized by Roman Catholic missionaries from the 16th and 17th century. And the word voodoo means spirit or deity in the Fon language of the African kingdom of Dahomey, which is now Benin. So as I was saying, like this is a much more structured religion. It has a very structured history and stories about the history of the world and the history of the Loas, which they call their Orishas Loas, the spirits. And the primary goal really of Voodoo is to serve the spirits themselves. And spirit possession or being ridden by the Loa is something that is a very common practice. I mean, there's lots of movies that have shown, you know, people at rituals, you know, with the fire in the middle and the drums, and that's all pretty correct. But you'll see like somebody acting unusually to the drums, maybe acting strangely or doing unusual things. And this is something that they look for to do if they do this also in Santeria being ridden by the Orisha. And this is a time to connect with the Orisha for the high priest or high priestess. Normally, I mean, it's sometimes other people within the group, other initiates, but mostly it's the high priest or high priestess that is engaged by the Orisha, the one who's leading the ritual. And this is a time to give that priestess knowledge to connect with that Orisha, to like the ritual, if it's for something in particular, maybe there's an answer to a question or whatever, that might be a place where that they would receive that information and or other information they would be passing on to the participants in the ritual. Or they could just be doing it for, you know, it doesn't have to be that, but it could be that. It could also be just being present, an option for the Orisha to be actually physically present in the ritual itself, to be present for the initiates and the people that are honoring them. Excuse me for a second. So, of course, there's different loas. They have many different names, and I will show when I go over the orishas a little bit, or the most popular ones that I've dealt with. I'll talk a little bit also about their various different names depending on which tradition that you're working with. So all of the information, plus some other information, will be given to you all who are members of the class that are doing the Year in the Day program. That really goes a lot more into detail about some of the different informations about Voodoo, Santeria, Hoodoo than I have here up on the thing. So you have something to refer back to, as well as lists of resources. So I found this really fantastical Voodoo versus Hoodoo. Just, it was a good little like quickie primer on the differences. So Voodoo, like I said, there's Loas, or the gods and goddesses, and it's very much their tradition is to honor them. Like I said, taking care of the spirits is the main thing that they do in Voodoo, whereas with Hoodoo, everything is a little bit more personal. It's more specifically about the family that's doing the hoodoo, or the place that the hoodoo is being practiced, etc. So in Voodoo, there's a very complex and usually expensive and very time involved process to become an initiate, and it can last for months, it can last for years. It's a very, very long process. But once you are a member like of a very like interesting group, though, like with many of these groups, there's no central group. There's lots of, smaller groups that work in the same areas, and they may cross paths sometimes, but not as much. So for Hoodoo, the initiation is it's more like, like I had with Lady Demeter, more personal, more hanging out with them, being with them. There might be some formal training, but it's mostly you just need to pay attention. And if you're not paying attention, then you're not going to get it. Like if you don't realize that that's what's going on, that you're being taught. Like I didn't realize until I'd been with her for a couple of years that that's what I was doing. But then when I realized, I was like, oh yeah, I better, it was like important that I looked at it a little bit differently and tried to get as much as I could out of it. But it was very informal. Like I don't have books. Like I remember asking her, what book should I read? Like really at the beginning, she goes, what are you interested in? And I don't remember what I even said, but she like pointed at a bookshelf in her shop and said, over there's a book on that shelf. You'll probably find something that'll work. And I'm like, okay. I was hoping for a little bit more direction, but that's kind of how more informal initiations take place. And then in terms of spell work, really, I mean, we have like these unrealistic ideas about what voodoo is. Like we see movies and TV shows, and there's voodoo dolls. Not that voodoo dolls aren't used. We all use that, not necessarily for voodoo, but lots of tradition uses, a doll to represent whatever. But you see that, and you see zombies, and you see like people acting crazy around fires with crazy drumming, and everybody has these really unusual, like as if they're, casting bad spells on people. And that's just not really what they're about. They're probably closest to Catholics, most closely related to Catholicism in terms of structure and how rituals are done and how everything is laid out and how teaching is done and everything else. The less like hoodoo spells, really they vary so much. It's really about the place, It's really about very personal, physical, in the moment things. There's not as much ritual surrounding it. It's like if you need a plant, you go outside and you pluck it, or you go in your kitchen and you get it out of the cupboard, or whatever. It's not a big palaver or a deal. So like it's interesting to see them juxtaposed against each other, just to see like how different they can be. And these, I would say, are the most far apart of the African traditions. There we go. Okay, so Santeria. So this is one of the Yamaya altars that I did for, I don't remember which year, but for one of the Yamaya rituals at the Unitarian Church in Fort Lauderdale. So Santeria, or the Way of the Saints, literally, it's called lots of different things, but it was really developed probably mostly in Cuba, and then spread throughout Latin America and the Caribbean. Though it is called different things on different islands for sure. And mostly the Western African nations of African enslaved Africans were brought to Cuba. So they had that commonality of having been from the same sort of place. And Santeria is really based upon like the development of personal relationships through like divination, through sacrifices, initiations, and sometimes through mediumship in terms of determining sometimes like who is the Orisha that's going to be in charge of you. Like it's not necessarily absolutely obvious always. And so this would be the traditional Santeria. This is not like us utilizing the tools of Santeria. So, but if you were going to be a part of that tradition, these are the sorts of things that we would be exposed to. So, and then mediumship between practitioners of the original and the Orisha's deities, who provide their devotees with protection, wisdom, and success, and who will guide devotees in times of crisis. So, like any god or goddess, they are used. They're religious. Like these are things that you get to know them. I talk to Yamaya all the time. She is present in my life, and I know I can talk to her when I want to. It's very amazing to me that I'm in that position, and I know that she's mine. It's not always that clear, but sometimes it is. So access to the Orishas can be achieved through various types of divination. And in the Ifa oracle, for example, a trained priest or a Babalaut, father of the mysteries, interprets the fall of consecrated palm nuts to reveal the Orisha's response to a seeker's question. So Santeria is definitely one of those traditions where asking a question of the Orishas is common. And of course, most of these things are, as you can see, this very elaborate altar. That's very, very common to have very big, elaborate altars with all the kinds of things that your Orisha likes on them. And the sort of commonalities amongst the different traditions are a basic belief in a supreme deity, which is Olodumare or Olofi, and an honoring of the many Orishas, who are the gods and goddesses, the spirits of kings and queens, and elemental natural forces. They honor their ancestors, the Igun. They're the spirits of the dead, Igungun. Respect for and honoring of the natural world and its elemental powers, especially as represented by the Orishas and spirits. So as we get it, when I start going into the Orishas, some of them will be very clearly aligned with natural forces. Divination is also one of the traditions that is common amongst these. Divination with various items such as coconut shells, which are called obi, and cowrie shells, which are called diligum. And then, of course, there's the ecstatic drumming and dancing, which is a very large and important part of the rituals of all of these traditions, real except for perhaps Hoodoo, who don't really have uh, necessarily rituals in the same sort of fashion that the other sorts of African traditions do. So most of the Yoruban traditions are initiatory, they're mystery paths that are predominantly an oral tradition passed on in person from godparents to their chosen godchildren. And it is shamanic tradition that understands the connections between the physical and spiritual worlds. Um, when I started doing this, there was not very many resources. And nowadays, this is just a very, very few of the books. And there's actually, ironically, I found less online than I used to find, but there's certainly some things online. But there are lots and lots and lots of genuine resources that are, if you're genuinely interested in this sort of path, um, that you can look up. So here are a couple of other names for different traditions. So candomblé, like candomblé, as I mentioned earlier, is from Brazil. Lukumi is from Cuba. Umbana, I can't remember. That's on the west coast of, the east coast of South America, but I can't remember which one. Macumba, Obeya is from Jamaica. Winti is from Suriname. Congos del Espírito Santo, that's the Dominican Republic. Mami Wata is also the Dominican Republic. She is La Dominadora. So you can see her there, the green goddess there up on the top of the screen with the snake wrapped around her. That's Mami Wata. And then there's Thai heads and the Garfuna, which they are more peoples that practice these African influenced traditions, but they don't have like a name on them. I think the Garfuna are from Honduras. The Thai heads are from Barbados, which is a very, very Christian nation. And it's not Catholic because it was a British territory. So it's more English, Church of England. So, but if you're practicing these kind of traditions, you would be referred to as a Thai head. So as you can see, there's lots of interesting different names and that each place over the years, over the centuries, have named their religion. So now the beginning of any ritual, the beginning of any understanding is always that we honor our ancestors or the Igongon. And if you do not do that first, they are the ones that are pretty much going to be taking care of you when you're here. They look out for you. They intercede with the orishas for you. You have to honor them. And I think that most pagan traditions, if even if they don't do it necessarily in the order, do have a place where they honor their ancestors. Certainly, our Day of the Dead ceremony is certainly like that. But a lot of our rituals, we honor our beloved dead, right? There's a time that we do that in some rituals. So this is a very, very, very important part of these African traditions. If you think about it, they're already been ripped from their land and brought here and forced to do things that they didn't need to be or want to be doing. So honoring your ancestors is a way of keeping alive where you're from. So here are a few of the Orisha names, and those are Orisha beads there on I guess it's the right. Is it the right? I don't know if it is from there. Anyway, so those are different Orisha beads. Some of them I made, some of them I purchased. But so here are some of the more important Orishas in the African tradition. So Elegua, who is also called Exu or Legba or Eshu, depending on your tradition. He is like Mercury. He's like I'll talk about him in a second, but he's the messenger of the gods. Obatala or Aksala or Batala or Denai. He is a androgynous sort of father sort of god. Yemaya, Emaya, Labalien, which is the Haitian, or Janina, which she's referred to as that in Brazil. And I always love that because my mundane name is Janine, Janine. So I always thought, just one letter difference, huh? And I honor Yamaya. So, and then there's Oya, Yansa, Idawido, or Ola. She is a goddess of change, and it ain't happy, easygoing change. It's like the hurricane that just came, and you don't get a choice. You messed around too much, and now she's here. Then there's Ogun. He is one of the primal gods. He's a god of iron. He's a god of people who go out and are the first one there, the first settlers there. And then there's the goddess of beauty, Oshun, or Ezuli. And she is very beautiful. And then there's Shango, and he is the king. He's also called, I think, Shango, Jango. They're all kind of pronounced the same. Shango or Jango would be Brazilian. And then some of the little bit, maybe one of the less known is, she's actually well known, but this is more Mexican, and that's Our Lady of Guadalupe. And she corresponds actually with the Earth Mother. And I'm not even going to attempt to pronounce that. It's Coatlaxo. See? Sorry. Or Tanansin. She is the Earth Mother. So Earth Mother seems pretty cool. I recently rescued a statue of her from a thrift store. It's one of my side hustles. There's also Saint Lazarus, or Babaluai, who recently came to stay in my house with the advent of the pandemic, because he is a healer. He's the guy with the 2 dogs and the limp. He's a gimpy guy with a cane, real skinny, with a beard. Then there's Mami Wata, Santa Marta la Dominadora, Mammy or Mother Water, and she is, excuse my language, she's a kick-ass lady. She's like in charge of markets, and she's definitely the protectress of women. And there's so many more, but these are some of the major ones and the ones that I particularly deal with. I highly recommend looking through. Let's see, you're interested in this. This book, Power of the Orishas, is a really wonderful book that gives you a lot of background on the Orishas and gives a good, not too long-winded, like just as an overview of how the Orishas kind of came to be and the most important ones. You'll see that the Orishas that I have here mostly are coinciding with the 7 African powers, which is a sort of magical kind of thought to get all the Orishas to come and give you a hand. If you haven't read this one and you're a young lady or an old lady, Jambalaya, this is a really wonderful one, and she talks about the 7 African powers, and she swaps out one of the gods with or one of the male orishas with Oya as a female orisha, so that there's a little bit more balanced that way. Anyway, so here is the first orisha that everybody will, no matter what tradition that you're going to be talking about, that you will deal with. He is the opener of ways and the messenger of the gods. He's the great diviner. He's also a trickster, so Loki-esque sometimes, only not as mean. Unless you're dumb and you do something stupid. He's also the keeper of the cemetery gates and the four winds, along with Oya. So Oya actually is in charge of the cemetery itself. So they hang out, and there's lots of stories or patakis that are relating to those folks, those two orishas. So Elegua, once you've called the ancestors in a ritual, the next thing that you do is call Elegua. He is the opener of ways. He's the one that connects everybody, everything that you're doing with the orishas that you're honoring in the ritual. So he's kind of like your, sort of like you're roping people in, and he's your guy that does the roping. So I'm also going to tell you a little bit about what colors and what numbers. Those are the most common things that are associated with these different orishas. So he's associated with the color red and black, and his numbers are 3 and 21. So this altar here is in my house. And when you give, you see the little concrete head there with the shell eyes and you can't see it, but there's a nail sticking out the top of his head. There's also cigars and chocolate and rum, and I think also some toys on the altar, because those are the things he likes. So I provided them for him. So the next goddess is Yamaya. And I'm not going to read all this stuff. It will be in your packet. But Yamaya is the mother of all that is. So she's the mother of all the orishas, the earth, the sky, everything. She is the creatrix of all. There's many patakis or stories that talk about the origins of the world, and she's always involved somewhere. Like there's various different ones that involve her getting pregnant and then bursting out bazillions of fishes and all kinds of other things. So she's syncretized with Our Lady of Regla in Cuba. I have right behind me, the picture that's on the screen, and the right behind me is that same altar. And I've rescued over the years many Mary statues, and created and I was never Catholic, so I was I'm sort of fascinated by the concept. When you're Protestant, there's no images of God or saints or anything like that, and so there's no images of women in your church life. So I was always fascinated by the Catholics having all these female saints and the Mother of God. Who would be the Mother of God? A goddess, right? So Mary to me represents the mother goddess. And so in Yamayash, that is what she is. So as with all the orishas, there's many paths, and each one has a slightly different personality, if you will. And they also have various different dates that are their feast days that usually are associated with Catholic saints as well. But for Yamaya, her colors are white or crystal and all shades of blue, but especially dark blue and white, which you can see here around my neck and on the picture there. And her number is 7. And so does anybody know what the number is for fairies? 7. The fairy number is 7. So for me, it was like all these different things that came together to make me know that Yamaya was my girl. All right, so the next guy, this is Obatala. I'm showing you altars in my home, just if anybody's interested in knowing how I have these images. So Obatala is a sort of hermaphroditic goddess embodying the energy of creation. He or she is usually represented by a kindly looking older person with gray hair. But one should not be fooled by that elderly look. They are a very powerful being. The colors for them are white with silver and I think purple. Am I right? Purple. Yes, and purple. And the number associated with Obatala is 8, but I've also seen as well 2. All right. So I don't work with him very much, to be honest, but he is a part of the 7 African powers, which is why I have altars for all of these orishas. So here is Ogun. And he is the wild man of the woods. He's the god of iron. He's a protector and a warrior. He's very quiet and dangerous. He reminds me of most of my ex-husbands. He's a god of pioneers, and he's like the father of civilization and technology. He like created tools, and like he cleared the woods so people could create villages and that kind of stuff. And then he was like disgusted with it and ran back off into the wood after they wanted him to be the king. So there's lots of different interesting stories associated with him. But there's a group of them that are all considered to be warrior types. And Elegua, Ogun, Shango, and a god called Orisha called Osane, who is in charge of the herbs, which I'll talk about in a minute. Those guys are all warriors. They all hang out together. They all are like good to each other. The Orishas, like in the Patakis and the stories, you'll see that they have like they have relationships like humans do. And they get into little silly twists, and they, challenge each other to silly things, and it's very interesting. Like I find it to be very similar. The story is very similar to the Norse traditions that have all the crazy, and the Greek traditions that have all the interesting, wild stories that are very interesting and good for learning different kinds of lessons. Anyway, so Ogun, his numbers are 3 and 4, and his colors are green, black, and red. So you can see he shares the numbers and colors with Elegua. And you'll see that when the Orishas are chill with each other, they like share colors, they share numbers. But if they don't really like each other all that much, they'll be like, get away from my number, get away from my color, get away from my symbols. So Shango is the god of fire. He's a warrior, judge. He was in some of the Patakis, he was a king, and he is definitely a ladies' man. The ladies love him. Oshun is always chasing him down. You can see I actually have a double altar because I only have one small altar for Shango, but Oshun's always chasing him down. So I thought it would be cute, nice to have them together so they can have a nice fiery love affair in my office. He's also very handsome, and he is a consummate drummer. So he is like one of the important orishas for drumming and drum circles, and you'll find that many drummers follow Shango. So his number is 6, which is my favorite number, and his colors are red and white. So you can see he shares colors with Ogun and with Elegua, and he hangs out with them. But he does get in a lot of trouble, and they always have to get him out. So here is Erzuli, or Oshun. Erzuli is the Haitian, and you can see here on this altar I have actually a Venus statue because I couldn't find. There is one you can see right next to her in the background there. Maybe you can see there's a statue of a young maidenly looking African. But to me, Erzuli is a little bit more like when you see some of the pictures of her. Let me see if I can find a picture in this book. Do I have a picture of her? Well, On here in this book, you can see this picture right here, how she's got like big boobs and her butt sticking out. Always, she's got enormous butt, gorgeous hair, giant boobs. She's always dressed to the nines, there to impress, and she does. She's very beautiful, and she can dance, and she's well, she is the goddess of love and creative powers. She's, you know, the mistress of abundance and beauty and passion. So she's very passionate, very, very passionate. And her number is 5. And her colors are yellow and coral and aquamarine. And I think you can see that all these have like very archetypal sort of flavors to them, all these different orishas. And um, this kind of flamboyant girl, we all know who she is, the one that is spectacularly beautiful and all the boys love her, and maybe all the girls love her too. And she's just like, she has a thing. There's some energy about her that's just so beautiful and elegant and passionate, and you just know who she is. So it's very interesting to see these different archetypes of, and you know, the motherly one, that would be Yamaya, right? And then the mad one, who's Oya. So here's Oya. And here in this picture, you can see that there's actually 2 altars, and one of them is my fairy altar, because for me, Oya is the absolute epitome of fairies. She does her thing. She doesn't give a crap about nobody else or whatever anybody else thinks. She is a warrior. She rules the cemetery. She's hanging out with the ancestors. She's got lots and lots of power. She's definitely not one to mess with if you don't like sudden change. But if you need a good psychic cleansing, she's the girl to go to. She will get rid of your crap. It may not be very comfortable, but she can do it. Anyway, so Oya on the bottom there, that bottom altar, is actually a Kali altar. So Kali is a Hindu goddess, but she's in charge of all the dead people. And I really always associate the 2 of them together. I don't know why, but I think it's just because they obviously their archetypes are very, very similar. So anyway, so Oya's number is 9, and her colors of those of the rainbow, but also purple and brown and red and terracotta, so kind of jewel colors. So here is Osain. Osain represents the forces of nature. So he's kind of, to me, he is the green man. And there's actually one big long altar to him with lots of wooden faces that you can imagine peeking out at you from the, you know, from the trunk of a tree. He is the keeper of all the herbs and the plants, and he is the one that gave them to the other. All the orishas have herbs that belong to them, and they come from Osain. He is a very private orisha, and there's no big rituals. And this is people who become priests and priestesses of Osain are not. They're the powerful elders in your group. They're the ones that already have experience, and they've been around for a while, and they have a lot of experience with herbs and plants and the natural world. He's associated with, as I mentioned earlier, Shango, who is his godson. His numbers are 6 and 7. So as you can see, Shango and him share a number, and his color is green, obviously. And I actually made my own Orisha beads for him because I couldn't find any when I wanted them. Because to me, when I wear them, it just reminds me to act in certain ways or to not act in certain ways. It helps me keep myself on track. All right, so here's Our Lady of Guadalupe. This is another altar I have up on the top here behind me. And she is a native Mexican goddess who was syncretized to Our Lady of Guadalupe, so the mother or Earth Mother. I don't know that she has any colors or anything like that associated with her or numbers, but I would assume that green would be a color associated with her. I think her statue, she has a green cape on in her statue. When you look at all these Catholic statues, you don't just look at the statue, look at what they're doing. So unfortunately you can't really see on that statue very well, but she's standing on the moon, and the color is green, so she's the earth mother, right? So green makes sense, right? And she's got a crown on her head, so she's a boss lady, right? So the goddess, got mother goddess. um like, I know that some of my other ones, like my Philomena statue, she's carrying an arrow and a lily, and I can't what, I don't remember what else, but they all represent very specific attributes. Um, so it's very interesting to do a little bit of, like, really looking at those things, researching them before you jump in, because there's lots and lots of details. Like this class is like the teeny tip of an iceberg. There's so much information and so many different orishas and traditions that you can investigate. So the other big important one of the other big important things for this tradition is offerings, or ebos, and especially offering ancestors, and the orishas. And all the orishas like very specific kinds of food and drink and plants and herbs and crystals and different kinds of symbols or icons. So when you're making an altar, you think about those things. Um, and when you're making offerings, you make sure that if you're offering to Yamaya, she likes watermelon, she likes honey, she likes cornmeal, she likes a certain kind of wine. I think it's red wine. No, I'm sorry, it's white wine. She's pardon me, white wine. Um, Flowers. Her colors are blue and white, so I try to find blue and white flowers or white flowers. So as you can see, all these things, like, they help you get yourself prepared for whatever magic you're working, or whatever ceremony that you're actually going to perform, or ritual you're going to perform. And it's just like any tool from any other tradition, whether it's, Wiccan, or Gardnerian, or the fairy tradition, or Dianic traditions, or whatever, or the Italian traditions, whatever. They all have their specific ways that they help you get focused. And you'll see that most of the offerings that they ask for are things that come from the places that those orishas are from, right? So just like the other gods and goddesses from other traditions. So music is probably, like, only secondarily important, because it could be considered an offering also. And very important is African drumming. And the drummers, depending on the tradition, they are trained very specifically in how to drum for ritual. If any of you have ever been to my Yamaya ritual, my good friend Mitch Kopp, who is a fantastical musician, was trained as a Winti drummer. So he actually understands how to drum for ritual without me even telling him what to do. He can follow the ritual. He knows what he's supposed to do. He understands the orishas, and what they need to be happy. So he's like it's like anything. If you can do something without thinking about it, it becomes that much more powerful, because you don't have to focus on reading the cue cards or those kinds of things, which is why a lot of traditions have you memorize things. So music is important, because not only is it used, like, to honor the orishas, but it's also sets the tone and the mood for any working that is happening, just like any music that we might use for our rituals. Dancing is also extremely important. This is a way that people connect, specifically that this is a way that the high priest and high priestess will connect with the Orisha that they are honoring. And as I mentioned earlier, when the Orisha rides the Santero, it's a time that they're basically, the Orisha has a physical form. The priestess is able to take the energy of that Orisha into themselves, and they are able to get wisdom or pass on either support or answers for the congregants and the people that are participating in the rituals. So as you can see, the costumes are very colorful. And if you know what colors the Orishas are want, then that, or sorry, if you know which colors the Orishas are associated with, like the top one is Elegua, right? Because it's black and red. There's a little white in there, but mostly black and red. And then on the bottom screen with the ladies, you can see on the very far right, there's a lady in blue, and she would be, that would be Yamaya. The one in the center in white would probably be Obatala. There's one right behind that you can see has kind of like a all different colored skirt and a multicolored headband on the top. That would probably be Oya. She would be a priestess of Oya. And then to the far left, you can't see her face, but you can see a yellow skirt. That would be, to me, would be Oshun, because yellow is the one color that is not shared. That's another interesting story that if you do your research, you'll find that she's the only Orisha that has yellow. But if you know, and okay, so even the gentleman standing behind the girl in the blue dress, the one that's standing against the wall that has the blue and white checked shirt, he obviously is a follower of Yamaya because that's blue and white. That would be for her only. So it's very interesting to be able to know these kinds of things. Like maybe you wouldn't be perfect every single time speculating, but you would be successful a lot of the time. So the other parts of the rituals that are really important, and this picture here is a Getty image, but I couldn't find anything else. But this is a voodoo ritual, and this lady with the crazy looking eyes, she's being ridden by an Orisha. And you can see she has a look about her that's just clearly she's not there and there's somebody else in there. And that's what it means to ride a high priest. But the other thing about especially the drumming and the dancing is that this is a time and a way to induce trance and also to go into very meditative states, to, as we do when we do ritual as pagans, in order to receive the wisdom and receive the teachings of that. Like being in that sort of semi state helps you to be more open to accepting the gifts that you're given in terms of the spiritual blessings or teachings or healings that are coming from the Orishas via the high priest or the high priestess or the Santero. So all these different things, as you can see, are things that really we do in our own pagan rituals. So not too far off from us. So this was a fun thing. I was like, so when we think of like where to get stuff to do rituals for, if you were going to do a hoodoo or voodoo or Santeria ritual, like where would you get, what tools, what is there? And I think they use the same kinds of things that we do: candles, oils, incense, crystals, herbs. They use glitter in their candle dressings to add a little oomph of whatever color you want to put in there. So they use a lot of the same things that we do. And a lot of these things can be found in a grocery store. This is stuff I had in my house. That's my dining room table. I just cleared it off and I was like, let me just find all the stuff that I would, and it's like, this is stuff you have in your house probably that you could use. Here's a picture of, oh, I love the picture of all the candles. So that was Publix right there. See all those candles there, all the 7-day candles on the shelves? That was in Publix. on Sheridan Street, just just east of US 1. So were all those oils. And so on the far right there, and then on the left hand side, there's you can see the other shelf with some colognes. Those are all from Publix. So you don't have to go far. You can see I've got up at the top right, I have like some herbs and stuff, and it's some of that stuff is just common herbs that I have in my cupboard. I mean, I'm a landscaper by trade during the daytime. And so I have an enormous garden, and I do a lot of, that kind of stuff. So I can go outside and get a lot of my herbs too, but you don't have to. You can just go to the grocery store. I'm sure that CUUPs has done some grocery store magic classes in the past. The other kinds of things that you'll see, excuse me for a second, is things like crystals. Bottom right there, there's incense and sage, and then things like bags to make mojo bags, or to make just purpose bags or spell bags. It's all the same stuff. And then there are, of course, lots of books that are readily available. So my final thoughts on all these traditions is that they offer us another way and more tools to interact with what we consider to be the divine, with the gods and goddesses. And they offer us more opportunities to create health and wealth and prosperity and happiness for ourselves. And it's very much not frightening or really any different from what we pagans do on a regular basis every day. So this final picture that I have here is me and Atsana. We led a Yamaya ritual for the Sisterhood of Helidome. Gosh, it's like 8 years ago. But you can see we're both wearing white, and you can see a little bit that we're both wearing white head coverings. Because the one thing that I didn't mention and that I should probably mention is when you do particularly Santeria type of rituals or spell work, always wear white and wear a white head covering. There's a, so the top of your head, right, is your crown chakra. And it's a very sensitive place. And I think that the white head covering is to protect you from having anything that you don't want coming into your spiritual realm. And this protects you from bad spirits or bad thoughts coming into you that you don't want, that maybe you're not aware of. And it's also the color white itself is for purity and cleanliness and spiritual workings. So you'll find, like as tonight, you can see I'm wearing white with a white head covering. I tend to try to honor that particular tradition. It's a really easy way to get yourself in the frame of mind of, it's just like one more layer of the tools that you use to get yourself in the place where you can make whatever magic you're trying to do happen. So I wanted to talk a little bit about the next class. When is the next class, Atsana? It's in November, right? Anyway, in November, when the second class is, I thought I would add this little slide here so we can talk about if you are actually taking the year and the day class. This is what we will be doing in the second class for this. We're going to jump right in and actually do some work. So since we're doing this on Zoom, you can decide at your house whether you want to do a mojo bag or you want to dress a candle for some kind of purpose, whether it's a cleansing ritual or healing or gratitude or to attract money or love or a job, whatever. So In order to do this ritual, I'm going to ask you to do a few things. I'm going to ask you to do some research and find an orisha that's appropriate for what kind of working you are trying to do. And you are going to do a couple of things. You are going to set up a small altar to honor that orisha. So since you'll be doing the research on that orisha, you'll know what colors and numbers and symbols are associated with them. You don't have to go about and spend tons of money. You don't have to do any of that. You can, if you want to like get a picture online, of the orisha to have on the altar so that you can have a specific picture, I suggest doing that. That would be really useful to help you get focused. Make sure that you have a small area for offerings to your ancestors and a small spot for an offering for Elegua. And then, of course, make sure you have offerings for whatever orisha you choose to work with. So if you do your research, you'll also find out what kind of food they like, what kind of drink they like. And usually you can find it in your own kitchen, like most of the stuff. You can get very elaborate, which a traditional, real Santeria or Voodoo ritual is going to have a really giant altar that's extremely elaborate with so much stuff on it. It's kind of overwhelming. Don't do that. Just an altar with a white cloth on it would do the job just fine. This is just an introductory little ritual. It's good to have a candle, preferably in the color your orisha likes, and some incense, maybe that they like. You can also have some sage for like smudging a little bit at the beginning. A bell to call whatever orisha you're working with. Obviously, I said an altar cloth, and then in class we'll put together either the candle or the bag. I'll go like in the class, I will actually show you how to do both of those things. And then that will be placed on the altar to be charged. And then I would like to see everybody wearing all white. And you can do like an accent, either, jewelry or a scarf or something of the orisha that you have chosen to work with. So as far as creating either a mojo bag or a candle in terms of materials, you can put anything in those things. You can put in your mojo bag, you can put stones, you can put crystals, you can put herbs, you can put items like icons of any kind, pictures, like small ones that can fit in there. You can put glitter, you can do anything you want. You can make the bag a part of the thing by making it the color, as that is associated with what you're trying to achieve. So for our class, make sure you have, if you choose to do a bag, make sure you have whatever supplies ready to make your bag. Don't make your bag. We're going to do that in class, but have it all ready. And then for the if you decide you want to dress a candle, I'm going to show everybody how to dress a candle in class. And you would need a 7-day candle or a pillar candle, or you can, you can do a taper candle. I wouldn't do a really small tea light. That's not going to really function. But if you have like one of those little, you can use a votive candle. So of course, white is always universal. So you can use white for anything, but you can also get them in a color of your working. You can get them in a color of the orisha. You can find an orisha 7-day candle, and you need something to draw on it with. So you either need a long nail. I think that was on one of those pictures. Let me see if I can find it. So yeah, right there. See where the paper and pen is? There's that long nail, or my athame. So, or a knife that you can stick down the side of the candle, or right in the actual wax. You also need an oil to dress on top, and I like to use glitter and sometimes herbs. And those all those things should be associated with either the Orisha or what you're trying to achieve. So, like I said, bring all those materials and have them ready to rock and roll. So when we start class, we'll go over making the mojo bag, and then we'll go over dressing the candle, and we'll do those things. And then you'll have your altar all set up. You'll be dressed all in white, and I will do a little ritual, and you guys will help me with it, to charge your candle or your bag. And if you're gonna have the candle, we'll probably also light that during that ritual. Does anybody have any questions? And just so you know, the directions for this will be at the very back of the packet that you're sent from Atsana. The last page.
Also, when I post the description for the class, it'll all be there. And the class is actually December 9th.
Oh, December 9th. Okay.
Yes.
So you got time.
Dragonfly, I'd like to go through the chat for you so you can answer some of the questions or the comments. So let's see. This is from Alisara. Can you do Hoodoo, Voodoo, and or Santeria rituals solo, or are they best done in community?
I don't think there's a best way. It's different. It's not best. I think when you're in community with others, the energy is a little bit different. So it depends on what kind of ritual you're trying to do. If it's more personal, maybe you don't want, 15 of your closest friends there helping you deal with something, you know what I mean? Maybe you want yourself, or maybe one other person, but maybe it's something that you really do want the energy of all those people. And then that would be the time, which is the majority of the time, I think, that a big ritual would be more public. But and this is my opinion, okay? And just like anything, we all have our opinions. So my opinion is really that the vast majority of traditions are all trying to achieve the same thing, health, prosperity, wellness, spiritual cleansing, healing, both spiritual, psychological, and physical, gratitude for what we have. I mean, this is common, these are common themes that run through whatever, all the things that any different tradition, whether it's African influenced or even Christianity,
The next question is also from Alisara, and her question is, what does the snake represent in these religions?
Various different things depending on who's wearing it. Sometimes it's knowledge. A snake sheds its skin, so it represents transformation. I know it's interesting when you see the Virgin Mary stepping on the serpent, and it's very like that represents, in the Catholic world, Mary controlling the knowledge of the world, really getting to the people. Like I think they see knowledge as bad. So, but the snake represents so many different things. It represents infinity, the snake eating its own tail, that's infinity. So it really depends on what they're trying to achieve in the different orishas.
This is from Frank. Do all African traditions use blood sacrifice?
For sure. But so do many European and Middle Eastern, and like Judaism was originally a religion of blood sacrifice. So, and also many of the pagan traditions, blood sacrifice. But I don't think that it's necessary. I think you have to look at historically where At least to me, you have to look historically at where we're at compared to where they were at. Like when they did blood sacrifices, like they would actually, and even now, actually, if you went to a real Santerian ritual, the chicken or the roosters that were slaughtered for that ritual would be eaten at the feast that followed. So, or that would be food, like back in the day, would be food that would feed the priests and the priestesses that lived in the temples. Like, so that it wasn't just like a waste. And it was very, I mean, something dying on your behalf is like a huge deal. Technically, if you're a Christian, Jesus did that, right? So that concept of blood sacrifice is not uncommon for sure.
All right, we have about 5 minutes. If anyone else has any other, oh, one more question. Here you go. I hear so much talk about appropriation of other religions and practices. Would you consider using these practices without initiation to be disrespectful, appropriation, or inappropriate? And this is from Nayade.
I really think it depends on how you approach it. So, are you turning it into the next fashion statement or are you using it for personal benefit? Like if you're trying to like take it and like use it to make earrings or candles or something to sell to the other people because it's like, yeah, that's appropriation for sure. It's not our place to be doing that kind of thing. But using the techniques that genuinely are so similar across so many traditions, I think that as with anything, if you go into it with respect and you treat it respectfully, that it's not disrespectful. Keeping in mind that no, you're going to insult somebody no matter what you do, whether you're doing a pagan ritual or a Santeria ritual. You can't please everyone all the time. So you have to know in your heart that you are doing it for the right reasons and that it's clean. You're not using it to change things or make money or look different. Like I don't walk around wearing white with my Orisha beads everywhere because that's inappropriate. But when I do my Yamaya ritual or when I teach a class, that is an appropriate time to wear them. If I do wear them during my regular day, which especially when I first started working with the Orishas, I actually would wear them inside my shirt. So I would have a t-shirt that was big enough that you could not see my beads because that was my personal business. And I didn't want everybody to think, oh, what is she doing with those? Because that is appropriation, like showing off as if like now because you can walk into any botanica store and buy the beads. There's no special way to get them. You can don all the stuff, but if it's more about this is something, these are techniques that are helping you to be a better person, I feel like that is not inappropriate.
That's a good answer. Next question. What is the meaning of the snake with Mama Wawa? Mami Wata.
Mami Wata?
Mm-hmm.
She is very much so one of her other name is La Dominadora. So the dominator. So she is like the Orisha of women in business, of the markets. She's a protector of women, and that is about power and transformation. She's powerful. She has not one but two snakes that are wrapped around her and in her control entirely. She is dominating them. So for her, it's a way to reflect some of her power.
From Anne, your head covering looks specific. Can you show how to do a proper wrap? Maybe in your next, no.
Nope. Every time it's different. Sometimes it works. Sometimes it doesn't. But I'll show you what I do, how I sort of do it. If I can undo it here. Usually I end up just having to take it off like that. So this is just, what do you call it? Those long scarves. You know, the ones that what do you call those ones? What are the ones, so it's just one of these guys. So what I usually do is, I guess I gotta sit down so you can see. So what I usually do is put it on my shoulder like this, put my hair up, because I got pretty long hair, sort of put it up in a bun so that it doesn't fall out. Haha. It always falls out. And then since it's so long, all I do is I wrap it up around my top of my head like this, cross it. And then I think I did like this on this one. Oh, look, it's doing it. Oh, I did it the other way. So usually I do it up like as long as it is, I get it around twice. And then I just do a single knot. And then I figure out, see, it didn't come out the same as the last time. I think I did it so the thing was on the back last time.
Hey, get up.
So as you can see, you just wrap it around your head until it's all tied. And actually, if you were actually from Africa, you would have a very particular kind of wrap, like all the different ways would indicate who you are, what tribe you're from, what place you have in that tribe. So it's very different. Now it's mostly just, you can just wear a white cap. The idea is really just have a white covering on your head to protect your crown chakra and protect. So, I mean, because most of the Santeria, Voodoo, Hoodoo, they're working with spirits, right? So the idea that an unwelcome spirit might want to come into you, and that would be the place they would come into you, right? So that's the whole point of that more than anything else. And a little bit of respect too, I think. Certainly the white is a little bit of respect.
Elizabeth said, thank you very much. She was very pretty, very beautiful. She had to leave. Frank, how does one get initiated into this tradition?
So you would have to go, if it was me, I would go and find a botanica store that I would start going there all the time. I would find one that I liked the owner or whatever, and that maybe one that was open to me asking questions or whatever, and talk to them. And then just you have to be persistent. There's very few Santeras are just going to take you on. Like, you have to really prove that you're interested and that you're genuine. Just like if a pagan teacher takes you on one-on-one, especially, if you're not committed, then they're wasting their time on you. So, and also being a Santero or doing Voodoo, especially Voodoo and Santeria and those traditions like that, not so much Hoodoo, there's a lot of money involved and a lot of commitment in terms of if you really want to be an initiate, you have to shave your head at one point for most of the Orishas. You have to live in certain kind of ways. You have to eat certain kinds of food. You cannot be around certain kinds of people. It's very, 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 very strict. And you have to find a godparent who's willing to take you on, which means you have to go, like I say, botanica store would be the best place. And they're all different ones. You'll find ones that are Haitian Voodoo. You'll find ones that are Santeria, which are the most of them are, but depending on what kind of neighborhood you go into, will probably reflect what kind of tradition you head to. I go to St. Lazarus over on, I think it's 33rd. It's up in Pompano Beach, 33rd, right off Federal Highway, near Copans, I think, a little south of Copans. But St. Lazarus, if you look, St. Lazarus Botanica Store. And it also, of course, helps to already be either African or Cuban or, Hispanic in some way, or have that kind of influence. Though, honestly, I was very concerned when I first started doing this, especially when I was being more public about it and doing Yamaya rituals, that I was going to be disrespectful. I really was trying to avoid that. So I really had, some of my colleagues that are Santeros review what I was doing so that I wouldn't be rude or out of place or disrespectful.
Okay, and one last question. Would veiling be the same as a wrap? Because sometimes my hair doesn't cooperate with wrapping.
I'm thinking as long as you wear a white fabric on your head. Think about Catholics. When you're a female going to a Catholic church, don't you have to wear something on your crown chakra? When you go, I've never been Catholic, but I've always seen Catholic women with something on
The
their
little
head.
white beanie thing.
Yeah. So the same kind of thought pattern.
Right.
So it's a doily. It's a doily.
My doily.
Yeah.
Okay. Janine, this was an excellent class. Thank you so much. Much appreciated.
You're very welcome.